Please join me in welcoming Sal Khan from the Khan Academy. Thanks, Sal.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be less camouflaged next time.
Okay. So I'm not sure the Khan Academy needs a lot of introduction, but maybe you can do 60 seconds on what you guys are up to.
Yeah, it sounds like some people might be familiar. You know, we're a not-for-profit mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And you know, that's kind of what got us off the ground are this collection of videos that I started making for family members, and it got traction. But what Khan Academy is now, the videos are part of it, but it's much more than just that. It's kind of interactive software. Students can learn at their own time and pace. It's being used in classrooms. We're internationalizing into all of the languages of the world. We're doing computer programming. And the idea is, can we literally create all of the academic and some kind of metacognitive and even career resources for people to really tap into their potential. If they have nothing else, that they have this, that they could literally self-educate. But if they do have access to a classroom and a teacher, that we can empower that classroom and the teacher to move up the value chain, to not focus on kind of the one-pace-fits-all lecture, but have more kind of human interaction, Socratic dialogue, whatever else. You know, this coming month, we're probably going to reach about 20 million students, and it's continuing, to kind of reach more folks. So, 20 million students in a month. Let's just pause for a moment. We skip over that as if that is just a small number. That's really impressive. The other thing that's impressive about this, as a former humanities major in college, you've made my humanities major somehow credible again. Because this idea that humanities, where you go away, you read the chapter, and then you actually discuss it in the classroom, which is a reversal of this kind of lecture format. So thank you, and can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah, no, it is this interesting thing, and this wasn't our idea, but as soon as, even in early 2007, when some of those first few videos were out there, a lot of science or math teachers started to say, hey, you've given a reasonable explanation of photosynthesis or factoring a quadratic. I shouldn't use my class time for that. I could use my class time for doing more interactive stuff, working one-on-one with students, problem solving, Socratic dialogue. And on a lot of levels, this was kind of, not just for me, it was a bit of an epiphany, but even when I started talking about it more broadly, like, oh, wow, yeah, like, why don't we do that? And it's true, it doesn't make sense in today's day and age for that, especially at the college level, to have 300 students in a classroom just kind of taking notes. They should be doing something else. But it's not a new idea. It's been happening in humanities seminars for, if you go back to the ancient Greeks, for thousands of years. And so it's good that this could now start to happen in STEM. And it puts, and not just in STEM, I think in humanities there still are a lot of lectures. And so it puts a little pressure for everyone to say, okay, is there a better way to do this? And it isn't about one thing replacing another. It's just, hey, if something's being handled in a way that's more personalized for students, they have more agency, they can fill in their gaps, et cetera, then when human beings get together, is there a way to leverage that interaction?
Do you think that Khan Academy is to make the best students better, or can you actually bring the kind of unengaged, disenfranchised student, into the classroom in a unique way?
Our hope, and I don't want to make false promises, but our hope is all of the above. Our super users on Khan Academy, they are disproportionately like, okay, that kid's going to do just fine in life. Mm-hmm. But they're not all from affluent. I mean, a lot of these kids are, I met a kid recently at a hackathon who was at a farm in Egypt who was kicked out of his school because he was questioning too much, and then he ended up working. He wasn't going to school. He was working at an internet cafe, and he worked for internet access. Like, that was his pay, internet access. And he found Khan Academy when he was like 12, and he started learning, and then it was just this autodidact, clearly gifted child. But then he ends up here. He's starting some startup now in San Francisco, and for those, I say that's great. We're having them, and we should send them little messages to remember us when they make their first. Right. That's our sustainability strategy.
Yeah.
We used to joke about it, but it's actually seriously.
Sure.
But when I started doing Khan Academy, I was literally from my cousins, and my cousins weren't that student. They were like the student that a lot of us would categorize as, they're trying to do good. They were kind of A, B type students. And I said, okay, I thought this is a sweet spot for Khan Academy. Kind of the students who are studying, who are trying to do well, but maybe can't afford a tutor, and this will help them. And that's definitely a lot of the students. But my big discovery when I first started putting this stuff out there, what disproportionately, and even today, the letters we get are disproportionately from students say, I used to hate math, I used to hate science, I was told when I was, pick the age 13 by someone that I would never amount to anything. And so they kind of disengaged, but they didn't lose that kind of human spirit of wanting to learn or have agency. And I don't know for sure how, is this 70% of people, 80% of people? I tend to be more and more optimistic the more that we see that it's actually a large percentage of the population. If you give them the tools, if they're in a non-judgmental way, they don't have to be embarrassed. I mean, we see kids, they're in 9th grade and they don't know their multiplication tables. In a traditional system, that's embarrassing. And just to protect your self-esteem, you want to check out. Right. But now if you can do it, no one's going to judge you, you can fill in your gaps. It's actually a very natural thing for most human beings to want to learn.
Yeah, but fear and stress is 31% less productive. Did I remember that correctly? In one of our previous sessions, we learned that there's a cost to fear and or stress in terms of productivity and efficiency. So you guys are now going into brick and mortar. You're actually taking the Khan Academy model and actually taking it to a school. What are you learning? What's working? What's not?
Well, we've always done this to varying degrees. Even in the early days when Khan Academy was just me, I used to run these summer camps. Because I said, okay, if we're doing all this stuff virtual, I've never viewed that as a replacement for the physical. I always said, what could the physical now do? And in these summer camps we used to do, robotics and market simulations and Socratic dialogue, whatever else. In 2010, 2011, when Khan Academy started to become a real organization, we started working, especially with some of the local school districts here, Los Altos, some charter schools, Summit Prep, to see, well, how can you use these tools to allow students to learn at their own pace, to have mastery learning, to free up class time. And we've continued to do that, and there's been, there's about 1 million teachers who are using us in some way to different levels of depth. But about 18 months ago, we said, hey, this is all cool, but we should have a testing ground for reboot, what could it really look like? And so we did start a little lab school under our offices. This is about 1.5 years ago, and so we're in the 2nd year, and it's been exciting. It's mixed age. We group students, they're all together, but their advisory group is based on independence level, which is correlated with age, but it's a different signal to the student. And they do their core skills. It's mastery-based, personalized, but there's a huge chunk of time, and it's full day, full year school for their explorations, for what they want to work on. And it's a startup and learning a lot, but so far so good.
Well, one of the things you just said there is this mastery-based. I think that's one of the most interesting things that, as I did research for this, that I learned this idea that if you get 80%, you're passed on the next thing, and you have this 20% gap. Talk about the effect that you think that has, both on self-esteem and people's long-term kind of productivity and efficiency.
Yeah, I think there's 2 kind of core ideas behind mastery-based learning. One is just just if you wanted to learn math well or learn physics well or learn anything well, really, this idea of master the more foundational concepts and then move on to the next one, which is common sense in a lot of ways, but it's not the way traditional school is architected. Traditional school, we take the quiz on exponents. You get a 90%, I get a 70%, even though I didn't know 30% of the material that just happened to be on the test. You didn't know 20%. We move on to the next thing, and the next thing's probably going to be negative exponents or logarithms, something that builds on that, somehow expecting me to learn that next thing even though I have this massive gap in the previous thing. And so mastery learning is just the idea, instead of holding fixed when and how long you do something, ensuring variable outcome, A, B, C, D, F, do it the other way around. Make it variable when and how long you get to work on something, and what's fixed is that everyone masters it. And not only is that a more important way for just learning math, I strongly believe, I saw this directly with my cousins and we get letters, that the reason why so many students hit walls in algebra or trigonometry or calculus or physics or name the subject isn't because they're not smart or because those classes are fundamentally difficult. It's because you're in algebra class, but you've accumulated all these gaps. You didn't learn exponents well. You didn't learn dividing decimals well. All of a sudden, you see that in the equation. It doesn't make sense. You're in calculus class. The algebra's not making sense. So just for learning, it's important, but it's also important on the mindset level. There's a lot of talk in education circles around the importance of mindset, of grit, perseverance, growth mindset, stepping out of your comfort zone. If you haven't learned it, keep working at it. But everything about a non-mastery-based system sends you the exact wrong signal. They say, you're at 80%. We should say, hey, you're at 80% right now. You haven't mastered it yet. keep working on it. That's consistent with grit, perseverance, growth mindset. Instead, we say 80%, we essentially put a big C on your forehead and say you're a C student, internalize that, and now move on to the next concept, which is really, I hope that wasn't too dark. But it's actively killing your growth mindset.
Yeah. I'm a perfect example of that. I was in 5th grade and they told me I wasn't good at math, and I became not good at math, as a result of that year. And I struggled with something, and math has never been a strong point of mine since.
But
that's really interesting. But I think, so if you can disrupt that at the individual level, but if you can disrupt that at the organizational level, like what is the resistance to this? Because I think everybody admits that education systems are failing, and yet you get criticized.
Yeah, well, I think the resistance, I think philosophically no one really disagrees with these ideas. I think the disagreement starts to come in, how utopian or how pragmatic some of these ideas may or may not be. And we've worked with teachers, very good teachers, who they will go into an algebra class, and it's clear, and they know that every year they have a couple of students entering this 9th grade algebra class who literally don't know their multiplication tables. And they wish that they could stop and spend a week letting them learn them out. But they're like, what do I do with the rest of the students? I'm supposed to cover these 50 standards over the course of the year. So the best I can, let me just at least cover them. I've done my job. And they have all these other pressures being put on them. And so there is a little bit of a leap of faith of, wow, if I let these students work at their own time and pace, even though it's called a 9th grade algebra class, it's okay for those 2 students to work on their multiplication. It's a little bit of a leap of faith that by doing that, when they actually get to real algebra, that they're actually going to be engaged in the algebra instead of a watered-down pretend version of the algebra, which typically happens when you see that students have massive gaps. So I think there's a mindset change. I think, look, it's a system that all of us, or most of us, grew up in, and it's been going on for roughly 150 years. And so that type of inertia mindset, I think people need to experience learning for themselves that way. There's all sorts of crazy institutional hurdles around grades and traditional transcripts. Even for the lab school, we've started talking to kind of admissions officers at universities, and like, okay, if someone doesn't come to you with a GPA, how do you, and it's hard for people. There's so many systemic things in place that have kind of calcified. It's going to take some time for it to loosen a little bit.
So if you had to change one thing, and what would that be? And if it's not Common Core, what do you think about Common Core? We said this was tough questions.
Yeah. So I'll start on the Common Core thing. I'm intimately familiar with the Common Core. Khan Academy's been doing a big push on the Common Core for the last 4 years. I've probably made on the order of about 1,000 videos on literally every Common Core standard. And 4 or 5 years ago, when the Common Core seemed like, hey, this is going to be for real, a lot of people, including some of our friends, hey, why don't y'all look into this? Right now, Khan Academy is purely supplemental, but there's some standards that are, before we weren't standards lines because you had to do 50 standards. And I was very skeptical. I was like, well, is this just kind of rearranging things? And it's not. But when I looked at the standards, the one thing is clear is that they are much more rigorous than the older standards, and they are much closer to what is done in places like Singapore and Finland. So that is for sure. I think the difficulties of the Common Core are because they are more rigorous. Look, you have a system where, depending on which state, large fractions of the students were having trouble with the easier standards. And now you're introducing harder standards. I understand the motivation is that this is a bit of a reality check. These are true college-ready standards, and so because there's these stories about students being valedictorian in their high school, and then they go to the university and they fail because no one was honest with them. So there's value there, but I think it's going to be just making things more rigorous without fully supporting and all this. It's going to be a challenge. So I don't know where it all plays out. We have invested in the Common Core because we do think it is rigorous and it's good from a standards point of view. It would make, I would want my child to learn the Common Core standards because I know that they're now going to be competitive with people around the world. But I would want them to do it in a healthy way. I think some of the times where it gets unhealthy is there's a there's literally is a Common Core standard for like, kindergarten or first grade that says something like, students can write a math sentence that describes, the additive property. They use some technical terms. Those terms are meant for kind of content creators, but they should not be used in the actual problem. But what happens is a lot of, I would say, content creators, publishers, they say, okay, we want to show how good we are at the Common Core. They literally will take that standard and they'll create a question for a kindergartner, write a math sentence that describes this, and the kindergartner's like, no, or like what? and this question is silly.
Yeah.
And that standard, all it means is, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old and now a 1-year-old. But like, if I get my 4-year-old and I ask her, okay, I have 2 bottles and a microphone here. How many things? And if she says, oh, well, you have 2 things here and then a microphone, so 2 + 1 is 3. If she just met the standard,
right.
And it's completely common sense. But there's this weird thing that happens in the education world where these kind of technical standards somehow turn to bad questions, which wasn't the intent of the standards creator. So the implementations of the standards oftentimes matter a lot more than the standards themselves. In terms of, if I had to make one change, I'd be less focused on standards. I'd be more focused on moving towards a competency-based model. Our model today, it's explicitly at the university level, seat time. I mean, literally credit hours are how many hours you're expected to sit in the classroom. But even in K through 12, it's based on how much time you spend in a seat, and you're promoted even if you only know half the material, et cetera. I would love to move to a model where you take, as long as you need or don't need to learn algebra, once you feel like you learn algebra, go prove it. And once again, it could be a traditional test, or it could be a combination of a traditional test plus some projects, plus some, who knows, some peer review. I mean, there could be interesting things you do, but then you've proven that you have real competency in it. And now you're ready to go to trigonometry, and you're that much more likely to really understand it.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned in reading your book and listening to some of your other talks is this idea. And once you said it, it made total sense to me. Like, up until a couple hundred years ago, education was private tutor. And then we went to this Prussian model of kind of, common public education. And now we're in this new age that it's changing. And we thought radio was going to change it, and we thought TV was going to change it. But it looks like, who knew? YouTube was going to change education. So talk about this disruption, and also, what do you think might disrupt Khan Academy?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, to your point, these ideas of mastery-based learning, or when human beings get together to have like a dialogue, this is what education used to be. It's just very expensive, and so the early industrial revolution, starting in Prussia, but soon thereafter in the UK and the US and Japan, and there's no coincidence, these were the first countries to really industrialize. So this was a good thing that happened back then. Said we want to universalize education. We want to make it something that everyone gets, the state provides. But the only economic way that they did that was like, well, it's the Industrial Revolution. Let's group people together. Let's move them all together at a set pace. Let's kind of spray some information on them, and some kids are going to get it, and they're destined for the professions, engineers, doctors, whatever. Some kids aren't going to get it, and those kids were going to, it was really, especially around middle school, started to be kind of a sorting mechanism, and it served the needs of the time, and not in an ideally equitable way, but it served the needs of the time. We're in an industrial age, which was fun. It was a pyramid where you didn't need a lot of people at the top of that pyramid, and you did need a lot of people at the bottom of the pyramid. But the world that we're getting into now is automation is going to, robotics, whatever you want to call it, the need for human labor is going to be a lot lower. Even kind of the information processing, kind of a lot of the white collar jobs that's what computers are good at. And so society has a very serious question. Clearly the information revolution, there's all this new productivity, but who gets it? Is it just going to be this little top of the pyramid, and then what does everyone else do? Do you have to do you have to redistribute, or do you have just an unstable social structure, or do you invert the pyramid somehow?
Robots are going to save us.
Well, robots are coming. We know that, and when you know that the robots are coming, and they're going to add productivity to us, the question is, they're also going to introduce new problems. Who gets to participate in that? And so, can we leverage some of that same automation to get more people to operate at the top of the pyramid? If we could, and it would just make it a better time and place to live. I don't know how much y'all watch Star Trek from an economic point of view. I recommend it. But in Star Trek, it's what, in the 24th century or 25th century, there's no scarcity anymore. In our traditional economics, the first axiom of economics is you assume scarcity and humans are rational, and the second one is always under debate. But the scarcity question, we actually are getting into a society. Things like land and natural resources are going to get probably more scarce, but other things, the scarcity might not apply as well. But if you look at Star Trek, literally everyone in the Star Trek reality is a researcher, an artist, an explorer. They've all moved to the top of that because there's less human need for the other things. And I think we can either move to that type of a society or something else, which is a little bit more dystopian. And it sounds very science fiction-y, but I think that it literally is over the next 50 or 100 years the type of choice we're looking at.
So what's next? We're about to wrap up. What's next for Khan Academy? What should we be on the lookout for?
We're continuing to just broaden the amount of content we have in all of the major academic, and we're starting to look at things in college access, career. We have a partnership with the College Board around preparation for the SAT and PSAT and things like that. We're doing a big push internationally. We have a great partners in Brazil, the Lemon Foundation. They're doing a lot of work there. Rest of Latin America. I'm going to go to India in a month. We want to do a big push there. Our computer programming platform, we're going to start exploring ways for students to even better help each other on Khan Academy. We're looking seriously at more tools to really simplify teachers' lives. And the whole idea of even the lab school, we didn't want to just start a one-off school that is, okay, this is a cool school. We're going to open source it, and we want it to be a catalyst for more people to do it, and maybe start schools just like it or take pieces of it and put it into existing schools. That's
fabulous. Please join me in thanking Sal for coming and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, good to talk.